Well, folks, I've been holding back on this front for a while, but I think it's high time we start mowing through those glyphs and puzzles behind the truth. A couple of details. Firstly, the glyphs, like the codex entries, they're hard set in the world, and for lack of a better phrase, I guess. And what I mean by that is that a glyph is going to be at a certain location, and it will always be the same glyph right there. The puzzles you encounter, however, have to be solved in an order. So basically I could have saved the barcode Monteriggioni glyph for the very end, and I would have ended up with the actual final puzzle there. It wouldn't have been the rotating one with Napoleon and all that. Now, the glyphs themselves, you might recall that we saw them smeared all over Abstergo at the end of Assassin's Creed 1 and at the beginning of Assassin's Creed 2. Rather than being just some crazy cryptic mumbo-jumbo, they're actually instructions left for Desmond to keep an eye out for those symbols. If he finds them, he uncovers the clues that are left by Subject 16. Adding on to it, all of these symbols have an actual real meaning behind them. First off, though, in order to cover all of these, I'm afraid I may have to go back to the first two glyphs. I neglected to explain what they represented. The first one we found above the La Rosa Colta. It was an omega symbol with a dot in the center. Just fancy symbol stuff, right? Well, not quite. Elsewhere in the rooms, where we saw it messages smeared in blood, there was a writing that read 2213. 2213 in the Book of Revelation is what it is referencing, in fact. The entry, spoken as the words of God, states, "I am Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end, the first and the last." It's a statement kind of exhibiting God's power over the world, but you'll notice it also is very similar to what the Templars have in their overall approach to their master plan. The second at Monteriggioni was a barcode with the serial number. Well, if you read the serial number, it is written in a number format known as Middle Indian, and it translates over to the 12th month, the 12th day, the 12th year. 12, 12, 12. The Middle Indian kind of gets into computery number systems like bits, bytes, and all that, and it's really not one of my strong suits. Suffice to say, that's what the numbers say if you decode it. The barcode, from what I've read, also supposedly encodes over to the numbers 666. Once again, this goes past me as far as the logistics behind decoding a barcode. They just aren't something I know too much about, I'm afraid, and it'd probably take me ages to cover it if I read up on the details. But yeah, 12, 12, 12, which is the supposed crazy person claim that the world will end, and also you've got 666, the mark of the beast. Pretty creepy stuff, I suppose. Now thirdly, the Mercato Vecchio glyph. This is written in Chinese, which there's no way in Sam Hill I'd be able to pronounce it. However, in English, it says, "One who does not forget what was before is the master of what comes after." So basically it says learn from the mistakes of the past in order to avoid the same folly, so to speak. Now, on to the puzzles of this glyph. I already showed these in the video, but I didn't cover them. First off, we have FDR, or Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the 32nd President of the United States. His reign of the presidency lasted through 4 terms before the 2-term limit was applied to the presidency, ending with his death in April of 1945, less than a month shy of the war ending under Harry Truman. So FDR had the apple, huh? Well, he has always had at least historically, had pretty favorable approval ratings among presidents, but the game might be hinting at that he used it to win over the people for all those terms, maybe? It's kind of vague. There isn't really a standout moment or push that shows he used the apple or for what purpose. So for now, the backstory is pretty hazy overall. but maybe we'll come back to it later. On the board, however, there is a hidden message. It's coded in a manner known as a Freemason cipher, or alternatively a Pigpen cipher. Basically, you match up the symbol with where it is on the cipher, and that is the letter that goes in that place. Decoded, it says, "The Masons brought it across the sea. George Washington passed it on." So it seems the Freemasons themselves held on to Washington's apple, the third apple, and cycled it in the ownership of the Freemason presidents throughout time. Next, we have a picture of Eric Weiss, or as he's more commonly known, Harry Houdini. Born in Budapest, Hungary in 1874, his family moved stateside right around 1880 or so, according to a census. In his early years, he tried to get into showmanship and such through use of card tricks and doubling as some circus stuff. Eventually, though, he grew interested in locks and escape tricks. This was about where he caught folks' attention. Eventually, he earned the nickname of the King of Locks in many circles and enjoyed pretty great success on that front. Straitjackets, handcuffs, seat in a chair, dangling upside down, you name it, he could get out of it. For some reason, though, this grew dull to him, and around 1908, he began to get into more dangerous acts. First, there was one known as the milk can, where he would be lowered into a large can full of water while upside down and escape. The curtains would be closed for this, but his brother noticed that the people, they wanted to see him go through this themselves rather than just hidden by a curtain, and this led to the escape pictured here. His ankles would be shackled inside of stocks, and Houdini would be lowered into a glass case and would have to escape. This would be known as the Chinese water torture cell and was basically the milk can escape 2.0. He went on to perform other magic tricks and debunk hoaxes and the like. You know, copycats, con men, charlatans, and Houdini stated outright that these were tricks and even wrote books on the tricks behind his magic. In fact, the modern-day magician duo Penn and Teller, they ended a TV show recently called Bullshit, and it was inspired by Houdini's undertakings in the field nearly a century earlier. It definitely earned him a few enemies, though, as you can imagine. As for his death, most folks know the story. He made a claim that he could be punched anywhere above his waist and not receive an injury from it. Well, a young kid in college came backstage after a performance, and Houdini was lying down. Some other art student was sketching him, and he was kind of half asleep. The kid who came back there asked if he could test Houdini's bluff that he could punch him, and Houdini was half asleep. He kind of went, yeah, sure, whatever, kid. And he wasn't really ready for the punch, and immediately after the first punch, Houdini suddenly showed to be in incredible pain. The kid hit him a couple more times, though, for some reason, but the kid probably wasn't too bright anyways. Anyhow, Houdini was rushed to the hospital, and when he was admitted, he had a fever of 104 degrees Fahrenheit, or 40 degrees Celsius, for those of you who are into that sort of thing, I guess. And he died not too long thereafter of a ruptured appendix. Something that's often left out, though, is that Houdini actually had appendicitis leading up to this. He showed pain and discomfort, but refused to head to the hospital. Even if this kid hadn't punched him and set things off, his appendix would have been ruptured in the very near future. The game seems to insinuate that he used the apple to create illusions and fool the crowd. As I mentioned in the thread, there is a Morse code message here hidden, but I neglected to get it on the footage right here. But just to say what it says, the code is located above his feet in the picture if you pan the little camera over it, and it reads, "They hit him in the stomach." The Templars in this universe hit Houdini in the stomach because he was playing around with the apple and they wanted it. Given the backstory with his appendicitis, this seems kind of silly, though, because he would have keeled over in time even if this guy hadn't punched him in the gut. Now, third puzzle. Mahatma Gandhi, or Mohandas Gandhi, amid other aliases. There's quite a bit of backstory here I'd have to get into. I'm sure the East India Company might ring some bells for a few folks. You had companies of the sort for a few nations, such as the Dutch, the Dutch East India Trading Company. Well, the one of importance here, though, is the British East India Trading Company. And I'm going to dumb down a pretty gigantic amount of history on this subject, so my condolences to anyone who's expecting to hear a more exhaustive explanation on it. Essentially, not too long after Queen Elizabeth beat the Spanish Armada, a trade company was established to get a spice route going. Spice must flow and all that sort of jazz. But the thing is, the French, Portuguese, and Dutch were already butting heads over the trade routes, and the British were getting implemented into it now as well. So you had constant little maritime battles, and there was just a gigantic mess over fighting for the actual trade route with India. Eventually, though, the British won over the king of the Mughal Empire, which was occupying India at this point in history. Upon showering him with gifts, he accepted and allowed them to set up actual factories and establish a foothold in the region. From there, things grew. Eventually, the British had a complete monopoly in the region. The company itself grew so powerful and prosperous that it developed an incredibly powerful lobbying group in the British Parliament. As the years went on, of course, local Indians were snagged up for the labor against their free will. The military expansions in the region ensued, and the East Indies Company also eventually went off into opium trade, which was a hot black market item to get sold to China. Smuggling grew so out of control, in fact, that the Chinese began to make smuggling punishable by death. Some spill down and backlashes from this led to what was called the First Opium War, and later on the Second Opium War between the Chinese and the Brits. In the years that followed, however, the East India Company grew more and more oppressive against the native Indians. Religious prosecution, racial discrimination, plans of forcing the populace to convert to Christianity, general abuse, horrendous conditions for workers, and just being overall jerks, apparently. An example? Well, the supposed straw that broke the camel's back was the ingredients used in an ammunition for a popular rifle in the area. This ammunition used a paper cartridge, and it required biting down on a part of the cartridge before it could be loaded into the chamber of the gun and fired. These were lined with a grease to keep them dry, and a rumor that gained some serious steam was that the grease they actually used was from cow fat. Yeah, cow fat. The thing is, eating cow is a huge religious no-no for the Hindus, given that the cow was seen as a sacred animal. This, among other things, led to the Indian Rebellion of 1857. Over the next several decades, India struggled with the British, vying for its independence. Thing is, though, that the movement eventually crept its way into commerce and politics, and past a point the vast majority of the populace just wasn't being heard and wasn't seeing any sort of benefit. Around this point, Mahatma Gandhi arrived in India. Prior to this, he was aiding in an anti-apartheid movement in South Africa and arrived in 1920 to help start the first non-cooperative movement. What's a non-cooperative movement? Well, simple. It was boycott anything British, don't pay taxes, pull out of government institutions. It was a widespread attempt at almost, I guess you could say, economically amputating the British occupation. Sounds like something that wouldn't gather much steam, you'd think, but that's not the case. Gandhi's charisma and idea garnered tons and tons of attention and support. After a couple years of touting this, Gandhi was actually thrown into prison for 2 years, and after his release, he wasn't exactly deterred in the slightest. He turned right around and aided in establishing a newspaper and periodical geared towards rural or outcast type folk in order to spread the word of the movement to people who normally didn't have access to this sort of information. Around this time, the younger people who were influenced by Gandhi were coming of age and began claiming roles within the government. A number of protests were also led in the future on quite a major scale, like the Salt March and the actual opposition to sending Indian soldiers for World War II to support the Allies. But that movement kind of grew out of control and derailed by 1943. It basically broke away from Gandhi, and there were a number of things that happened that wouldn't adhere to his nonviolent creed. By the late 1940s, Indian independence was gaining a lot of powerful momentum, and by 1947, the British were physically separated from Indian territory. India had finally won its independence. However, in 1948, Gandhi was shot while on stage leading a prayer mass. The man who pulled the trigger had ties to a nationalist extremist who claimed that Gandhi's actions had severely weakened his power in the region. Today, Gandhi is seen as an international hero. He definitely had a strong following. Now, the claim here, it seems to be that he used the apple to win over the populace. This would be the same apple that Queen Elizabeth had ownership of, so it's plausible that the East Indies Trade Company established enough power in the British government that it wrestled the apple away from the monarchy. It then used it to rule to some degree of comfort in India. Eventually, however, Gandhi came into ownership of it, in spite of his non-violent creed. As with the previous puzzle, this one has a hidden Morse code message that I neglect to catch. It states, "The bullet hit him in the chest." Hoping to spread worldwide peace, Gandhi is hinted at using the apple to rally the people behind him, but a Templar hired the gunman to shoot him. The apple, it seems, getting claimed in the process. Or so it seems to be. Okay, up for a fourth glyph? I thought so. The glyph for this sucker, I found it on the second story of Santa Croce, and the glyph is, well, I have no clue what the hell it means. I dug around for a while and I can't find any sort of reasoning as to what it is, or what it even stands for. If I could take a stab, I'd say maybe a Chinese character? If anybody on the thread has an idea, let me know, and I'll definitely update in the post.
It's getting easier and easier to hack into Abstergo's mainframe. It's like I know what data I'm looking for. I've already lived it.
Now, moving on to the actual pictures. These four have a common thread to them, so we'll go through them a little bit faster than the previous thing. The first image, Vietnam, 1968. The bazooka itself has a piece of Eden in it, but this looks like an everyday Joe and not some famous dude in history, unless there's some sort of a Bazooka Joe reference I'm missing here. Badum-tish. No hidden codes though, so let's move along to the second picture. The second photo is some point after D-Day when the Allied forces were rolling through France. There's a hidden code on here though. As you can see from this right here, it's a bit of a hexadecimal code for you guys. What does it translate to? Well, it translates to Antikythera mechanism, much older than 150 BCE. The Antikythera mechanism was found in the early 20th century by sponge divers off the coast of the Greek island of Antikythera. It was among the ruins of a shipwreck dating back to the 1st or 2nd century BC. The device itself wasn't really identified until some time later. Eventually, it was realized that the 14th century astronomical clocks, used for astronomical information in general, had a mechanism in them which was identical to this. That's right, it took the rest of the world 1,500 years for its astronomy to catch up to what this device was already capable of doing. Without getting too far into how it works, it's seen as the world's first analog computer. The code here seems to indicate the creation was actually way before that, or that this wasn't even the first of its kind, just the only one we've come across. Third picture, Beaufort, South Carolina, during the American Civil War. Now there's another message here to boot. It is encoded with a Caesar cipher. The cipher works like this. A numeric value is given. To solve it, you need the cipher itself that indicates a reference to that. What I mean to say is, if you have knowledge that A is equal to 88, then B will be 89, C will be 90, and so forth. Going in reverse, 87 would be Z. This value is the decryption shift value. Though not the first form of encrypting, it was pretty darn popular for the longest time, but as you can imagine, it was very easy to break once you caught the actual pattern. Whereas in a case of, say, a pigpen cipher, you'd need the cipher's key itself in order to solve the puzzle. There's a code in the top corner, and it reads, Ancient City, Rajasthan, India, irradiated by POE. Rajasthan. Doesn't ring a bell, does it? Well, it's referring to one of the cradles of civilization. Alongside Egypt and Mesopotamia, you had the Indus Valley civilization. Its decline and collapse has a number of theories surrounding it, but the most likely one is a combination of drought and lack of trade with Western civilizations. One of the other theories that was shot down in recent years was it was attacked by some rogue tribes around the area. However, large burials which were found that date back to this era don't seem to have any signs of broken bones or the like. It seems more so like people died en masse due to something that didn't really result in breakage of bones, so starvation, maybe disease? Given how these civilizations base themselves along rivers, like the Tigris and the Euphrates with Mesopotamia, the Fertile Crescent and all that. These folks were much the same. However, the rivers in the Indus Valley area, they have a habit of drying up and wandering considerably, so to speak. And you could prove this if you looked back at the sediment stratigraphy, the grain sorting and what have you. And it's pretty much accepted that across the past several thousand years, it's constantly just wandered in the region. And basically, the game hints at a piece of Eden irradiating the lands. Rather than using it as a means for sticking to the old idea of hostiles being responsible for this, the universe seems to side with the lands being poisoned or something with radiation. Moving past that, we have one more puzzle to solve. This is the first painting that depicts an actual gun, as you can see on the side here. The central figure you see here is Buddha, or Siddhartha Gautama. There is also a note here in binary which reads Sumerian, May 23. This ties into Sumerian mythology, or the religion followed by Mesopotamia, another cradle of civilization. May is, quote, one of the decrees of the gods, foundational to those social institutions, religious practices, technologies, behaviors, and human conditions that make civilization possible. So it is a list of decrees given by gods that basically form the backbone of society. We have an actual number assigned to each of these in the list. Treading through the images here we've seen, you'll notice a common theme. Weaponry is always involved. You know, the bazooka, war, the first depiction of the gun. Now, what is May number 23? The 23rd decree is weaponry. The truth puzzle here is stating that weaponry was given to mankind by the gods. There is kind of an odd thing here though. The Antikythera mechanism, though not a weapon, is insinuated to have possibly been a gift from the gods as well, because it mentions it's much older than 150 BC. The piece of Eden that irradiated the Indus Valley civilization, on the other hand, well, that's kind of interesting as well, because all we've seen so far are apples of Eden. They can yield knowledge, create illusions, and cause tricks, but what if there are other pieces of Eden with more power than the apples? Something that could be on par with a modern-day weapon of mass destruction. Well, I guess we'll have to look through the remaining puzzles in the near future to see if we can pull out some more details. But for now, in closing, let's take a look at the footage we've unlocked so far. Yeah, not too much, is it? I'll loop it 2 more times here, and we'll leave it there for now. See y'all next time.